Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Siefken. I'm the Executive Director for the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I want to welcome you this morning to our, I would say, fifth or sixth installment of this Energy Resilience and COVID-19 webinar series. So we've been getting together about twice a month. In fact, it's 3 times this month. Talking about some of the issues related not only with COVID-19, but also with some of our ongoing disruptions. So this morning we have leaders from some key utilities in the Pittsburgh region, but I realize that many of you are from places other than Pittsburgh. So we're going to take our sort of local regional conversation to a national one as we're going. Many of you have submitted questions in advance, so we will be trying to address those as we go. But if we don't get to your question, or if you have a new question that pops up, please use the questions part, not the chat. It's much easier for me to keep up with if everybody puts them in the questions. But before we get started, I do want to say thank you not only to our panelists today for taking time out of their busy schedules, also to all of you for doing the same. But I'd like to say a special thank you to all our frontline workers. Obviously, talking about utilities and planning, resilience, is critically important for our region and the country. But there are people that are doing much more work than we are today, keeping the lights on, keeping the water flowing, and keeping all of the power and energy moving in our systems. So I want to say thank you to those folks, including our healthcare workers. Obviously, we cannot thank them enough. So with that, we're going to jump right into our content for today. And I understand I'm breaking up a little bit. Not sure how I'm going to be able to fix that, but I will do my best with today's internet connection. I am moving into some slides this morning. I do want to tell you about the Scott Institute. So we are the hub of energy-related activity at Carnegie Mellon University. There are about 150 faculty members who are working on energy-related topics. And so we are always looking for ways to engage in partnerships, in innovation, and to support entrepreneurs and startups. So the purpose of our webinar, as I've mentioned, is to really focus on research, industry, and innovation during COVID-19. And we do have to add that additional layer of what are disruptions these days. So our hope is that we have informative dialogue on the energy impact on corporate, nonprofit, academic, and government operations. And with that, today we have our webinar number 5, which is around utility planning. Thank you, of course, to our 3 partners who are with us today from Duquesne Light Company, Peoples Gas, and the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. So we do have a couple of additional upcoming webinars. On July the 9th, we'll be talking about energy poverty, some of the domestic and international challenges associated with energy systems. On the 23rd of July, we'll be talking about investment and startups. August 6th is transportation energy, and August 20th, batteries and storage. So I want to get right to our introductions for today as we have our important partners on the line with us. So with that, I'm first going to introduce Krysia Kubiak. She's the Director of State Regulatory Strategy and Government Affairs at Duquesne Light Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She's worked there for over 12 years on energy, law, and policy. Her department works on policy issues including solar, distributed energy resources, electric vehicle policy, and sustainability. So about the Duquesne Light Company, they are our local utility. They've been around for about 135 years. So they are a Pennsylvania transmission and delivery utility that's delivered reliable and safe energy to the Pittsburgh region using next generation energy technology to supply reliable power and superior customer service to more than 585,000 homes and businesses throughout the region. Next, we have Jeff Nehr, who is the Vice President for Business Development for Peoples Natural Gas Company. So he fills a critical role driving revenue with a focus on strategic commercial sales and marketing. Jeff oversees all facets of business development, competitive rate development, alternative fuels initiatives, asset optimization, and regulated gathering programs. So Peoples is a natural gas provider serving approximately 740,000 homes and businesses in Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. The company's mission is to improve the lives of its customers and help build long-term economic growth for the region it serves. And finally, we have James Stitt, who's the manager of sustainability for the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. He's responsible for integrating sustainability practices throughout the authority operations, ensuring that PWSA's sustainability efforts enhance economic performance, environmental conservation, and community engagement. So he's tasked with increasing the use of energy efficient products and engineering practices, moving the authority to embrace innovative and resilient strategies. So about PWSA, it's a municipal water authority serving more than 300,000 people throughout Pennsylvania and surrounding areas with drinking water via 930 miles of water lines, 5 reservoirs, and 11 tanks. And the sewer conveyance through 1,200 miles of sewer lines, approximately 25,000 catch basins, and 4 pump stations. So PWSA is the largest combined water and sewer authority in Pennsylvania, producing an average of 70 million gallons of water a day. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and have all of us on. So good morning, everyone. Let's start with a question this morning, and I think we'll start with Duquesne Light. I'm gonna ping you first for an answer on this one, and then we'll go to PWSA and Peoples. So from a utility perspective, each of you has most likely been part of significant planning for this set of disruptions that we are in the middle of. So what are some things that you've done? And can you speak to how your organization has planned for such events? Are there things that you would do differently? Krysia?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we as a utility did have a lot of contingency planning. You know, our company is based with a lot of engineers who think about contingencies a lot. So, and one of those things was pandemic planning. So we had in the past year had tested our VPN, had everyone work from home, made sure that they had the hardware that they needed to work from home. So we had some of those things done. I will say the scale to which we needed to have people work from home was much longer than we had anticipated. I think we still think in terms of storms in our planning, just because that's mostly what we deal with. So when people had to be home for a long time, and as many, so we got 1,000 of our workers who were working full-time in the office to working full-time at home within a week. And it was a very impressive job done by our IT folk to get all that up and running. And that has been really going well. I will say our plan did not take into consideration childcare needs or school closures. And I think that was a blind spot on the team that did go into that planning. So that is definitely one of the areas that we missed and continues to be crucial as we talk about the recovery phase, right? So we don't miss it anymore, but we are watching the school districts opening up and the childcare openings in the same time we are making the plan for recovery right now. We also, I think, underestimated the impact on supply chain. So we have a lot of people who have been educated in a just-in-time supply chain way of looking at things. And when the supply chain broke, we realized that doesn't work. I will say that because we had a team that was working on this 24/7, they saw some of the problems before kind of the rest of the country did. So we figured out how to deal with them. But I feel sorry for lots of businesses who are dealing with a broken supply chain right now.
James? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I would second pretty much everything Krysia just said. I mean, we experienced the same kind of thing, and going into this, we of course are regulated by the Clean Water Act and other federal and local and state government regulations. One of which is an EPA requirement that anything over 3,000 serving 3,000 people, any water service has to have risk assessments and emergency response plans in place, and we've done that and had those in place. But they were mostly focused on, kind of like Krysia mentioned, the mentality of storms or natural disasters and those sorts of things. This idea of a pandemic where it would impact not just a section or an area that we could focus our attention, but a blanket across everything was maybe not quite on our radar. So we deployed our plan as quickly as possible and have learned very quickly that this same issues with the domestic kind of concerns of employees having now to work at home, and not just them working at home, but spouses working at home, children coming home from school, and all the other issues that go along with that when everybody is trying to still get in their responsibilities for the job. So it's been something that we had to adjust and be very flexible. And I think the employee response has been pretty amazing, that everybody has really stepped up, and we're seeing a lot of areas where from the customer standpoint, I don't think they can tell a difference. And that's quite amazing when you consider the heavy lift that it took. And I think, to second also the valiant effort of our IT and tech guys and gals to set everybody up at home with everything they needed in a short order was pretty amazing.
Jeff.
Similar to Krysia and James, we recognize that we provide essential services to the community, and we need to stay functional, while this is going on. So we looked at our workforce, determined, who were the essential service providers like gas control, gas dispatch, our call center, and our field operations. And then we focused our efforts around how to keep them safe, right? To how to keep them socially distanced from other workers, isolated, but also keeping things from outside coming into our workspace. So we determined what workforce could work remotely. We took them out of the office space, and then we focused around providing, protective equipment for that workforce that had to continue to work in the field and in the office, and around disinfecting and also making sure that, the area was free from, things that could harm our ability to move forward. But like Krysia and James said, working in a remote environment for the third of our workforce that was out there, it was a learning exercise in, our ability to have, the proper equipment for the folks that work remotely, but also the IT systems that support that. But all those things happened very quickly. We have a good team, and we pulled it together fast.
So that actually sort of moves us into another question, which is, did it make you think differently about your workforce, and who is deemed essential versus not? So I know, Jeff, you've mentioned a couple of those things, like you had to immediately discern who was essential and how they would work. But have any of the others of you, Krysia or James, did you all have to also make those same sorts of distinctions? Had you done any of that thought before, or was this something that really just came together through this series of COVID-related shutdowns?
I would say we had, all along, we had our sort of standard set list of the critical workers that were necessary for any given day in any situation that would have to be, on site or have access to provide the water and sewage services that we need to provide. One of the things that we maybe hadn't thought of was, in looking at this from the pandemic perspective, made us begin to realize that, well, what happens if a large portion of our workforce gets sick and can't come to work? Who are we then turning to? Who backstops, what positions? So we went through, as a result of this response, and line by line, position by position, and employee by employee, went through and made sure that everybody that was doing a particular job or had an identified role was also backstopped by a second or a third, so that we had a deeper bench, so to speak, of assignments for succession should somebody or a group, because the way this thing was playing out, we're seeing, like entire groups that were, collectives of victims to the disease. So with that in mind, we then started looking at how do we shift workers from other sites or other job areas and spread them around a little differently if it's necessary. We had a couple of areas where we had only one person that was qualified for a particular job. And, because of attrition and retirements in recent years, those positions had not just, and those roles and duties had just not been refilled. So we have plans in place to do hiring for those, although much of the other hiring is on a freeze right now due to everything else that's going on.
When I mean, we consider all of our employees essential, but out of those that couldn't work from home, which was about 500 of our employees, they generally had reported before the pandemic to 7 locations, and they now report to 45. So we quickly put everybody into kind of pods, and then each of those pods only worked with each other, so that if there was illness, it only impacted one of the teams, one of the pods, and did not impact the entire group. We also took our control center and put it into 2 different locations. Again, put everybody into certain groups, so you only worked with certain groups, and then had deep cleanings between those groups in different locations, so that we made sure that if the virus hit any one of these groups, that we kind of kept it to it. And I will say I'm very proud of the fact that we did not have any transmission at work. So, and we worked really hard on that piece to make sure that our employees were healthy. That continues to be the concern, right? Over everything else. To Jim's point, we were concerned about it where we had to keep the lights on with half of a workforce. We were planning on doing that, but you wanted to delay that as long as humanly possible. And I think at this point, I mean, depending on what keep looking, but at this point, we haven't had a lot of transmission within our workforce.
And I agree with Krysia that, all of our employees are essential. And I think I should, state that what we looked at was really around who could work remotely and who needed to have certain, facilities within the workspace that weren't portable, couldn't be moved to home, or had to reach out and touch customers or pipelines, and those things couldn't be done remotely either. So, and certainly the thought was around protecting the people that had to come into the office, had to go out into the field, and making sure that we did everything possible to ensure their safety from, increased disinfectant in our office and our vehicles. And again, the proper safety gear, but also social distancing, right? All meetings were virtual from there forward, eliminating gatherings of groups of people. We even locked down the floors within our buildings so that we wouldn't have people, going to and from floors needlessly. And then the remote folks, once you were determined to be a remote employee, we turned off their badges so they couldn't get in the building. So we really took an approach of locking down and making the buildings that we operate safe.
Thanks. Those are all great responses. Again, a reminder to folks that you can certainly insert questions in the Q&A box, and I will get to those as they come in. I do want to talk about a couple of things, and I know that some of these have already been touched on, but what are some of the things that you want to make sure that your stakeholders know? And how have you tested your agility? I mean, being agile for a disruption like this takes investment. So have your plans changed, or are you thinking about plans for the future? Because towards, as we go through this conversation, I want us to sort of think about what does that new normal look like? So have you all made adjustments to your planning processes? Who would like to go first?
I can.
Okay.
People's Gas does have an emergency response team that kind of pulls together cross-discipline resources, legal, call center, engineering, operations folks, to kind of react to situational issues, and I think James put it like, we think of things more as incident level, not necessarily as pandemic level. But we did pull on that same cross-discipline team to really define what are we going to do and how are we going to address, the things that we need to do to operate going forward. So that team was in lockstep with what was going on with the state and local officials around their rules of engagement and work. And so, the team made sure that we were following those guidance, but also taking it a step further to make sure that, again, we had the measures in place to make sure that things were safe for our employees, but also for our customers, and maintaining the same level of service we had prior to, the events that occurred. So, and then the last thing I think that's really important is that having a rigorous communication plan with your employees to kind of tell you like the status of, do we have infections within our workforce? What are we doing to contain it? If there are people that are getting secondary contact with people that were infected, what other procedures? And basically laying out that policy. And that same communication plan is actually being implemented for bringing folks back into the office, which we're rolling out over the next month.
Yeah, to Jeff's point, we had an incident command team that actually started in February. So in February, they were already starting the plans long. And I think they saw a lot of the risks before most of us did. So by the time the shutdowns came in March, and we had actually shut down a couple of days beforehand, they were ready for it. I think we used a lot of the guidelines from the CDC to make determinations. So early on, when we had suspected cases, it was difficult to get testing. What we did was take everyone we contact traced everybody in our company, and we sent everyone home who had been in contact with the person who was suspected of having COVID, including if an employee's husband had tested positive for COVID. We sent everyone home that had been in contact with that employee. And we continue to do that to the day, but I will tell you the way we contact trace has changed based on CDC guidelines, right? Because CDC has changed these things during the period of time. And we are not to the point where we're gonna make these calls, we're gonna rely on experts. So we're grateful for guidelines that kind of set a standard on a lot of this. As we look at our planning agility, I will say that incident command team and their ability to make decisions quickly during the course of a day without having to get 15 different sign-offs was very effective in making sure we could move quickly. And I think it also helped our employees know that their safety was our first concern. And so even though sometimes in the beginning, like it was hard to get masks, right? When the governor's order came about, it was about 12 hours before everybody had to start working. It was difficult to get masks. We worked really hard to figure out how to get through that.
Yeah, I think as large scale utilities, we all seem to be working from the same playbook. We did many of the same things. I think that having the executive alignment with our board and our leadership at PWSA that took this very seriously from the beginning, and trusted the committee that was assembled to be the response team and the planning committee for this, that took the lead, that again made up of various heads of the different departments and agencies within PWSA, were able to make these decisions effectively and quickly, and then communicate them out and be as transparent as possible with all the staff, as well as our customers, to make sure that we're protecting the safety and well-being of everyone involved. So it's been interesting to see in an industry where we often talk about there's things like geologic time, and then there's PWSA time, and PWSA time is far longer to get anything done. This was not the situation for us. So very, very new way of doing things, but worked out for us very well in the end.
So I have a couple of really great questions that are coming in. Before I get to those questions though, so please keep them coming. I'm curious, I heard you mention the CDC. I'm curious if there are if you heard guidance from others, and this relates to one of the questions that's come in. was it just the CDC? Was it also WHO? Were there other organizations where you were, really tracking for information? And related to that is around policy and regulatory issues. What policies were in place or would have been helpful had they been in place to make this easier? And I know that supply chain and PPE is an important part of that. So I'd love to hear some comment on that.
If I may, the first part of your question there about
guidance. What kind of guidance?
Yes, the guidance. Yeah, sorry. Guidance. I got hung up on the policy piece. But no, the guidance is that we definitely looked at, the CDC guidelines, but also, and I'm sure my other colleagues here will agree, there's industry groups and, national and international coalitions of, utilities in the same sector. We used those as a sounding board and for feedback and for guidance with all of our other water utility partners across the country through our different organizations that we participate to see what they're doing, following, what's happening in other cities that may have been like slightly ahead of us with the, impacts of the pandemic and how their response was effective or not effective, and learning from their lessons before we had to deal with the same situation here. So it was very useful for us to sort of collaborate with those other city and partners across our network. As far as the policy stuff, certainly there's been broad support for the shut-off moratoriums during this, so that we're not, people who, so many people unemployed and being impacted by this financially. There's, a lot of support for moratoriums on our shuts so that we don't limit people's use for essential services.
Krysia?
Yeah, so in addition to the CDC, we also use, there's Homeland Security guidelines that related directly to our industry. We did the same thing. Seattle specifically, utilities in the Seattle area that had kind of dealt with it earlier, we ended up using them. And of course, I mean, the governor had lots of orders that were coming out on a pretty regular basis. So we spent a lot of time on those. I will say early on, what we decided was once the governor outlaid the red, yellow, green, we decided we would not make any changes to our employees' locations till at least 2 weeks after we switched to a different stage. So if we went green on June 5th, it would be 2 weeks after June 5th before anything would change, because we were very conservative and we wanted to make sure that if there was a second wave, we could see it coming early, that our employees had enough time to adjust. That said, we've decided we're not bringing most of our remote workers back until Labor Day. Although some people still have to start, but most of our remote workers will stay at home. Again, we go with the most conservative option for the safety of our employees.
And I'm glad that Jim brought up like customer delinquency and turnoffs, because we're a big proponent of, making sure that customers that are in distress have safety valves to, get relief. And certainly like People's, Duquesne Light and PWSA are all participants in like Dollar Energy Fund and, all the vehicles, the help, support network out there for people in need that can't afford their utility bills, and how can they work out payment plans or can get grants or loans from the government. And we spend a lot of energy on that. Those things have been in place prior to this, but it really helps to have those programs here today looking at what we're dealing with.
And I appreciate your comment about Dollar Energy Fund. Obviously, that's an important organization, a nonprofit in the Pittsburgh region that helps folks make sure they can make ends meet and don't lose service. So thank you for that. A note about innovation, or sort of thoughts about innovation. So many would say that a situation like a pandemic or the disruptions that are happening around us are all great opportunities for innovation. And so a question has come in. So first, I do want to think about that bigger idea about innovation. Like, what are some things that your companies are exploring that could be helpful from an innovation perspective? Maybe there are technologies that you realized are needed. And along that line comes the question, which is about contact tracing. So you mentioned that, and there are many apps that are becoming available, which is sort of a technology fix for those. So are you feeling confident in some of these contact tracing apps that you're seeing? Is that something that you are thinking about or deploying? Or are there other technologies that have become helpful or needed?
So I know we were looking, we certainly are doing our own contact tracing right now. And we've got a couple of people who are super busy with all of that right now. But we were looking at all the options, but we did want to have options that were balancing, right? So there are options out there that you can hand to the employees when they come into work. So you'll be able to better tell who they were in contact with while they were working, but they don't necessarily go on the person's personal phone or handle data that's outside of it. So our contact tracing is always kind of limited to who they're talking to within the building. If they come in contact with someone who has COVID outside of our building, that's generally not our area of concern about it. But there are employee privacy issues, and figuring out who has access to this data in a short period of time. As you're starting to look at the new tech, we have always been very concerned about the security of our tech, right? The cybersecurity hits to utilities during this certainly spiked. They expected that our defenses would be down. And so we saw a lot of bad actors trying to infiltrate into the utilities. So we are extremely concerned about making sure we maintain a high level of cybersecurity throughout all of this. And any of that new tech that you're going to kind of roll in quickly could always be suspect to some of those issues. So.
Interesting. Any others?
Well, I guess from people's perspective, we're always interested in exploring new technology. Contact tracing would be something that we would look to explore to help if it made sense for us to, from the safety and of our employees. Again, to Chris's point, we got to be sensitive about the, being overtly into our employee space, but I think there's a balance there. But certainly we'd be open to looking at technology if it helped us to make sure that our workspace was safe, but also, our customers are safe as well.
So next question, and this is related to not only COVID, but some of the other disruptions that have happened. So have you been making different or thinking about different types of investment to sort of build up the resilience of your organizations? Obviously, the whole purpose of all of this is to help figure out, what are the things as we're building new normal, what are the things that we should be thinking about from a resiliency perspective for any organization? A big question. Anyone want to tackle that one?
Well, I think, from our perspective, we definitely rolled out a lot more laptops because of our remote workforce during this time. Certainly we weren't heavily bent on laptops for all employees, but now that this has occurred, it seems like that's the right approach. And then also a policy around taking laptops home so that you don't have to go back into the workspace that could be contaminated to get and continue to work. I think also, the virtual meetings, video conferencing is something that we kind of did, but only in small amounts. And I think we're really looking to do more of that in the future, eliminate some of the travel. But, I think using the video conferencing really taught us that we can be effective with not necessarily having to be there face to face.
Yeah, I would second that. Thought about the technology for, meeting and conferencing and getting people together sort of online and digitally has been actually much smoother, much easier, and, much more effective than I think anybody believed. The utility industries as a whole, and the water industry, I think especially, is rather behind. I think a lot of these innovations much of the time when it comes to that sort of stuff. And the work from home and remote access was not always something that was even encouraged, and may have even been frowned upon within our utility. But we've come a long way in a short time. And just this month, they announced that we will be letting people back into our buildings at the end of the month at our main office headquarters, but it will be on a voluntary basis. Those who are working from home and it's working out for them and want to continue or need to continue because of childcare issues and other such things are going to continue to do that. So that flexibility, the technology, and the innovations that we have at our fingertips now has really opened up a lot of doors for us to give people benefits and opportunities that they didn't have before.
Yeah, I'm just going to take that a different track, which is for us, the resilience on COVID really came down to making sure that the circuits that fed the critical needs in the community at the time, so like hospitals, the areas that were being considered for tent hospitals, right, like the expansion, the nursing homes, that those did not lose power. So we spent a lot of time fixing kind of little things in our terms, like cross-arm broken insulators that you wouldn't normally see an outage from. But if a storm came through, we were prepping for the fact that if a storm came through, we needed to make sure we had as few of outages on those critical circuits as humanly possible. And that's the kind of resilience for Duquesne Light that is really critical and came into sharp focus, especially because we rely a lot on what we call mutual assistance crews. So if we have a big storm, crews come in from all over the country to help us, as they did to Florida, as they did to Texas, as they did to New York, as we've gone to other places to help. But during this course of time, we were very concerned that they might be bringing virus with them to infect our crews. So we were trying to plan for a world where we could take care of ourselves solely in our own little world, either because those crews weren't available or because we were concerned about the impact to the health of our employees.
It's a very interesting point. When the crews can't come, how do we keep everything moving forward? It actually moves me to one of my last questions, which is this new normal. And I know that we're, through this conversation, we've been talking about this as if we've hit the first wave. And as we know, there are more waves coming. We're seeing spikes in every state, I think, except for 3 right now. So how is resiliency sort of being baked into some of your planning? And what do you think how do we get back to something that looks like normal? I've heard a combination of, workforce stay at home and come in. There's also the, if you feel comfortable, where will we land? Because there are big businesses and small businesses across the country trying to make these decisions right now. What are your sort of thoughts on that? And they might have to be your personal thoughts. Krysia, do you want to start?
Sure. I think the key is to work slowly, to plan for a long runway. I mean, one of the reasons why we moved to Labor Day, of course, is because most childcare facilities were gone for the summer, right? Very few people have their camps left. Some of the childcare centers aren't back, and we still don't even know if the schools are going to start in September. So we need to make plans based on that piece. But also, to your point, if a second wave is coming, we need to make sure we've kept it planned. So I think we are taking a hard look at building design, the new building design and how many people you can fit in there, how often you can get it cleaned, what are the, we just recently went to a place where everyone got rid of their personal printers. For efficiency perspective, made a lot of sense at the time, but right now it means that there is a printer out there that 50 people could touch in a given time. So, all of those things need to be taken into consideration while you start looking at bringing people back to work. And the best way to do it is as slowly as possible.
And I guess from our perspective, we feel very good about the past 4 months and how effective we were at being able to maintain our critical service to our customer, but also the effectiveness of our workforce working partially remote, partially in the office. We are going to bring people back to work over the next 30 days, but we feel like we're very well prepared to go back to what we are doing today if things start to spike. We are monitoring, how many people have contracted the coronavirus in our company. We have weekly updates around that. A lot of the folks that have contracted it never even got into the office. It was detected before they came to the office, and they self-isolated, as well as isolating others that may have been in contact with them. So we think we have effective programs there. I think this is the new norm for us. It's not necessarily changing our behavior, it's improving on our behavior going forward.
Yeah, for us, it's very similar. It's, take it slow, take it one step at a time. This idea that, oh, we're going to just plan for going back to the way it was, I think is out the door. That's no longer much of an option. There isn't, a new plan that's going to be required. It's going to take some time to sort of get through this. None of us on this panel here can sort of shut our doors, reconfigure everything, and then reopen again as something new. We have to do this sort of, build the airplane while we're flying it thing. So we are taking it, one step at a time, trying to follow sort of the guidance that's being offered out there from, all different levels, but also watching very carefully at how this progresses. As you said, we're on the verge of spikes in most of the country, ramping up again after, some restrictions were relaxed. So we don't want to, as Krysia said, we don't, want to go out there right away. As soon as they say the light's green, go. We're going to hold back, bide our time a little bit, make sure that everybody's safe, because if we were to get hit with a similar situation as to what had happened in some of the meat packing plants and other industries, that would really devastate our ability to provide the services that are required, and that all of us on this call provide these essential services.
And I think with that, that's probably a good place for us to stop today. Thank you so much for having such important insights, particularly as we're thinking about not just sort of the immediate nature of kind of the decisions you made, but how you're sort of thinking about that and building towards the future. So special thank you to Jeff, Krysia, and James from Peoples Gas, Duquesne Light Company, and Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you to all of our guests who were on the line today. Thank you for the great questions that came across. We do have all of these webinars archived, and we're planning them probably through the end of the year, about twice a year. As many of you know, the Scott Institute has a lot of in-person programming, and we are moving to this format for the foreseeable future to keep everyone safe. So with that, you can check our website, which is www.cmu.edu/energy. And we look forward to having future conversations. Hope to see you back online with us in a couple of weeks. So thank you again to our speaker participants today. Very much appreciated having all of you with us. And any of you who did not get your questions answered, we're going to try to answer some of those. They kept coming in fast and furious towards the end. So we'll get those questions answered and send them out to you as a part of our follow-up. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Thank
Anna.
you all.
Thank you, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.